Why is Matthew McConaughey driving a Lincoln? Come on, we don't really believe that Matthew McConaughey, drives a Lincoln. So why do these companies do that? Why do they feel the need to go out and find these celebrities to endorse their brands? Another kind of aspect of business that a lot of people want to talk about is brand. And they want to talk about it right from the beginning. They want to talk about brand and they want to talk about culture. And I can tell you that in the past, I thought that both of these things were generally kind of like airy-fairy, fluffy, stupid, largely unnecessary. I now know for a fact that they're incredibly necessary. They're very important. How you think about your brand, how you think about your culture is essential to growth. However, it's one of those things, much like entity structures, that everybody wants to talk about right from the beginning. Day one, they want to talk about what is our brand, what do we stand for, and all these things. And I've also learned from experience, having started a number of different businesses, if you try to decide from the very beginning what it's going to be, before you've sold anything, before you've gone out and introduced your product to the market, you're way too soon there. It is also too early. So much like thinking about how we go about structuring an entity and all that fun stuff, what we're talking about now when we get into branding and character diamonds in particular is an essential subject for those of you in the room once you're making sales. It is a very dangerous subject if you are brand spanking new, just getting started, because it allows you to do what I call waste a lot of time organizing the file drawers. And that's, I think, something that a lot of business owners do, especially entrepreneurs. They want to spend an enormous amount of time doing all the little kind of fun, creative, and even administrative tasks that is everything other than seeing if anybody wants to buy the thing that they want to sell. You're all beyond that point, so that's why we're talking about this. If you're not beyond that point, or if you are considering launching something brand new, I would encourage you to take notes on this. I would encourage you to file it away, and I would encourage you to come back after you've made some of those initial sales. Otherwise, this is a phenomenal opportunity to waste a lot of time. All right, so there's kind of my extended disclaimer. As we go into it, let's talk about character diamonds and essentially this idea of how do you keep your brand human as you grow and scale. When you're brand new, when you're first launching your venture, especially if you're a solo entrepreneur, if it's just you out there doing it, your brand is human because your brand is you. But what do we do as it begins to scale? It's something that we faced here at Digital Marketer, and it's something that if you aren't facing yet in your business, you absolutely will face it. So kind of thinking through some of this stuff, I think it's important to ask ourselves, why is Apple even today, and I know they've stumbled a little bit, why is Apple today still far more loved than Dell? Dell's a very successful company. They're based here in Austin, Texas. I know lots of friends who work at Dell. So I think it's great, but why is Apple more loved? Think about the term. Why is it more loved? And as a result, I believe, why is it a more valuable brand than Dell? Similarly, if you got any comic book fans in the room? Anybody read comic books? Yeah, me too, okay. How did Stan Lee back in the 60s come out of nowhere? Stan Lee and Marvel Comics seemingly came out of nowhere to beat DC in terms of circulation and overall comic book sales. It's pretty amazing if you don't realize. I mean, DC Comics had Batman and frickin' Superman, right? And you got now all of a sudden these characters that nobody had heard about coming out, and everybody wants to learn more about the Spider-Man and the X-Men and these kind of new things. And they didn't care so much about the old guys. Well, how did that happen, right? And what can we learn from it? And I also think it's important to ask ourselves, why are these cows standing? If you know anything about Chick-fil-A and what they're doing and how Chick-fil-A is a far more successful and valuable brand than Kentucky Fried Chicken. How does that happen? How do these brands, when we're all fundamentally doing the same things, how does some become so much more loved and lovable than others? And how can that add a tremendous amount of value? And I also think it's worth asking ourselves, if you have seen this, how many of you guys have seen these series of commercials? Okay, Google Matthew McConaughey. Don't do it now. Matthew McConaughey Lincoln commercials. He's like, I was driving a Lincoln long before anybody paid me to drive a Lincoln, right? And it's just the most kind of absurdly, don't get me wrong, I love Matthew McConaughey. Like, he's my man crush, right? He just is fresh out of you-know-whats all the time. But these commercials have been parodied because it's just so unconvincing, right? Why is Matthew McConaughey driving a Lincoln? Come on, we don't really believe that Matthew McConaughey, drives a Lincoln. So why do these companies do that? Why do they feel the need to go out and find these celebrities to endorse their brands? Whereas, if you think about the brands that are most loved, more times than not, they don't need celebrities to endorse their brands. The brands themselves are the celebrities. The brands themselves have become loved. How do we do that with our brand? So we think about branding, it introduces a bit of a paradox, this idea that for a brand to truly scale, it needs to abandon the face of its founder. How many of you guys, you are the face of your company, like you are the company? Okay, that was, for the most part, that was me and Digital Marketer. It was me, and then it was me and Perry, and then it was just me again. I was the face. It was a guru type driven business. I knew that wasn't going to scale. I did not want the business to be, Ryan Deiss Co. I did not want to be tied to it for a lot of reasons. And I knew that ultimately if we were going to build a lot of value, we needed to do that. We needed to abandon my face. But I didn't want to lose the thing that still made it good. I didn't want to lose the things that made people want to invest in the trainings. So if you're not the face of your business, like how many of you guys you're not the face of your business? So let me ask you, does your business have a face? Does it have a general spokesperson? In many cases, no, right? Where you have to be really, really careful of is that you don't become boring and inhuman, all right? Why does Lincoln and so many of these other brands have to hire celebrity endorsers? It's because the brands themselves have no soul. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to co-opt and align themselves with people who do, all right? So whether you are the face, how do you scale without losing your humanity? And if you kind of are growing and you're beginning to build this boring and inhuman brand, how do you change that? How do you make sure that you scale and remain relevant at the same time? And this is the other question, those of you, how do you transition from a personal brand into a corporate brand? All right, and the way that we get there is you need to transfer your most desirable and interesting character traits of the founder onto the brand. This is the ultimate hack. This is the ultimate shortcut. If you think about a brand, okay, a brand is a hero. A brand is a fictional entity. Now, if you think about the word fiction, fiction does not mean it's untrue. Oftentimes, fiction is more real than nonfiction if we think about like what it really means to this. So I'm not suggesting that you lie, and this is where a lot of brands go sideways. All right, a lot of brands, they want to be something that they're not, and that's where it comes off fake. That's where you have Matthew McConaughey driving a freaking Lincoln. Okay, nobody believes that. That's a lie. So I'm not saying that you should turn your brand into whatever you want it to be. What I'm saying is you need to think, why do people like you today? Why do people like you? Why do they like your company? The ones that deal with it most intimately, what do they like about you? If you're experiencing any level of support today, I can assure you it's because you're doing some things right, and it's not just that you're providing a pretty good product or service. Because guess what? Everybody is. All right, everybody's providing a pretty good product or service. If you're in a market worth being in, you have competition. If you're in a market worth being in, you have probably pretty good competition that, guess what, they're providing a pretty good product or service. So if you're competing and you're winning, it usually has more to do with the extras that you provide above and beyond just a pretty good product or service. It usually has a lot to do with some of these desirable and interesting character traits, either of the founder or of the people who are most visible within the organization. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to capture that. All right, we want to codify that, and then we want to inject that into our brand.